Your report talks of very near misses. Were we lucky that nobody died?
Sadly, that's the conclusion that I have reached, that essentially it was an incredibly near miss. We were probably seconds or minutes away from either a life-changing injury or, indeed worse, a fatality. The stadium that's behind me, breaches were attempted 17 times. They were mass breaches, both trying to get into disabled bays where they essentially pushed people in wheelchairs out the way or followed them in. Doors closed and they pushed up against, that gets you crushed, i.e. people, human beings being crushed. And the other one that we're very clear about is they tried to force the fire doors and the safety doors from the outside, and by so doing then you have this surge of people in, and again we have clear evidence of people falling, 2 or 3 people falling on each other. Tam, you know yourself that in a sports situation is so incredibly dangerous, in a safety situation is so incredibly dangerous. We had children here on that day, we had grandparents here on that day. I've seen CCTV that's made my hair stand on end, and we were very, very close to a major disaster.
Yeah, I was there myself with my little 10-year-old fella, and it was frightening, certainly on the way in and then also on the way out. Your report does reference that it was a perfect storm. We've got the backdrop of the pandemic and lockdown effects on people, the first football final for decades. But those mitigating circumstances aside, you found unequivocally that planning at Wembley was not good enough and all agencies were caught off guard.
Yes, I'm afraid that's the case. I think clearly what happened is COVID was a really important factor. In some ways, I think it was a distraction, and it meant that, for example, there was no major fan zone in London. Because of the COVID regulations, they couldn't have a fan zone, which I think was a huge issue. I think the Metropolitan Police would argue that they had nowhere to disperse people to. The stadium, of course, was not full. That's a highly unusual situation, so people coming here thought they might chance it, and certainly having spent a day drinking and using drugs, their entitlement to chancing it was greater than probably it would have been if they'd been sober. You also have the fact that here in Wembley, a lot of the pubs were on restricted numbers, so normally there's about 9,000 people can drink in the pubs around here. They had 1,500 on the day. So there were mitigating factors, but the problem was, Sam, nobody put all of that together and switched the light on that said, when England are playing in a final, when we've got national euphoria, where we've got COVID, all of the factors that were the perfect storm were also the factors that I think people could have foreseen. And that's why I'm saying this wasn't a government review, but I am asking the government respectfully that it should be something that we should consider as a country about a game of national significance.
Yeah.
Now, the other point I want to make, if I may...
Yes, go
Sorry, go on, yeah.
I was just going to say, I mean, you said nobody sort of had that light bulb moment and said this is going to be a problem, Baroness Louise. Who should that have been? Should it have been the FA? Should it have been the police?
Well, we have in this country we have something called a safety advisory group that is part of the system to check safety. And they together, frankly, missed the size of this. They did make changes along the way, but I think, to be fair to them, I don't think any of them could have predicted the huge outpouring of violence and criminal behaviour. Nothing in the plans, nothing in our system as it stands at the moment. Stadiums aren't built and policing isn't created to actually try and contain mass violent disorder of what we saw on that Sunday. So, yeah, I am really clear there was a perfect storm. I am really clear that mistakes were made. I don't call negligence. Very clear on the distinction between those two. And secondly, if anything comes out of this, the most important thing that comes out of this is that we take a long, hard look at ourselves and eradicate this type of criminal behaviour from football. Football is used as a vehicle for thuggery and for racism. And I think if there's one thing I'd like to see changed over the fact that we didn't have a disaster on that Sunday, we had a near miss, it would be rooting out once and for all this thuggish behaviour, which seems to be what football gifts them.
Yeah,
and that's a disgrace, and it's humiliating.
Nobody's seeking to exculpate the behaviour of some of the people that were there. You want to create a set of protocols around events of national significance. That's what you want to come out of this. Who would be at the top of that chain of command? Because the problem seems to be, and your answer to my question about who's to blame, is that nobody really holds the pen, do they, here?
So I think that's that's one of the things I'm really clear about, is that one of the recommendations in the review is that the Safety Group Advisory Organisation is recharged with the responsibility to review who is responsible for what we call Zone X. So there's a on Wembley Way, or Olympic Way as it's now called, from those steps behind me down to the tube station is called Zone X. Who is responsible for community and public safety on Zone X is just not clear enough. And I think that's where the fourth recommendation about charging them, because they are the safety specialists, in brokering that deal. I want a red dot on someone's head when we have an event of national significance, that everybody knows who takes responsibility, and this isn't left to a group of people, it's left to a system that determines it. And one of the checks we would have, if they will think about doing this, is that as part of the process, built into that process, is an independent look, an independent checkpoint that is automatically part of it. Because what happened here is it's like a load of people have got head torches on, right? So they're looking through the lens through their own head torch, and nobody stuck the lights on and said what is happening in the room. And if we had an event of national significance, particularly for a football match like this, it would be built into the system that somebody comes along and switches that light on. And I think that would have been something incredibly helpful on that day. But I don't want to underestimate that the near miss, the loss of life, was about the recklessness, the chosen recklessness of people that decided to try and break into the stadium. And they need to have that on their heads. That's the shame.
Yeah, a lot of wider questions about the culture of football supporters. Baroness Casey, you are somebody, if you don't mind me saying, who is known for a no-nonsense approach and for getting things done. How much confidence have you got that this won't just be another report, another review that's gathering dust on a shelf somewhere?
Well, in these scenarios, and in one that as serious as this, I am never confident until I see the action that flows. It's no point people like me writing reports unless there's change. So I'm not confident of anyone at the moment. I believe that they will do the right thing and that they will make changes. The police, the FA, safety people, Brent, no one wants this to happen again, and indeed the government. But until I see change, I won't be confident.